There we go. Can you see the recording? Is that come up for you all? Okay.
Yeah.
So welcome everybody. This is our Orchard Leader workshop. The theme today is forest gardens, expanding orchards into community food forest by building in different edible layers. So this workshop's being run as a part of a series by Tuvy Powys. I know some of you that are on the call have been along to workshops before, and welcome to anyone that hasn't been to any workshops before. We've got 3 more workshops after this one. Some of them are online and some of them are face-to-face, and I can share a bit more about that later. So welcome everybody. The session is being run by the Orchard Project. So we have Kate and we have Witch Hazel here, and it is hosted by Social Farms and Gardens. So I am the development worker for the Tuvy Powys project, and we're supporting community gardens across Powys with various different types of support, and the Orchard Leader training is part of that. And the Orchard Project are running these sessions for us. So I think that's probably everything from me. I will hand over to Kate and Witch Hazel, and they can tell you what the session is going to look like today. And yeah, do put anything in the chat if you want to ask any questions.
Do you want to start, Kate, and then I'll leave the intro bit? Is that okay? You need to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Kate Davis, and I am the Swansea project manager along with Witch Hazel for the Orchard Project. So I'll be giving a PowerPoint presentation about forest gardens, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about fruit tree guilds as well, using a fruit tree guild that we have was developed up in Manchester around an orchard as well, because it's the two blend together really. Forest gardens and orchards can, both contain fruit trees. I think the forest garden example is if you've got a larger space, but if you've got a smaller space in your orchard, the fruit tree guilds really embellish that. So that's me, and Witch Hazel is going to just give you a brief introduction to the Orchard Project.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm also in Swansea. The Orchard Project is based around the UK. We have people in Scotland, in Edinburgh and Glasgow, in London, in Manchester, and then the 2 of us in Swansea. So we're quite a dispersed team, and we support we are the Wales team, but we don't do much in North Wales. So at the moment we go up as far as Newtown, but do most of our work really in the south of Wales. And I also run I run a course in Bristol as well. It's an online course with a few face-to-face days in Bristol. So we do that as well from here. So that's the Orchard Project, and we mainly work with urban orchards. That is our kind of reason for being. The Orchard Project is to work with people and communities in urban areas to ensure that everyone has access to fruit trees and for their well-being and food and biodiversity. And so that's our kind of main focus. But in Wales, we also tend to spread out a bit into rural areas and so on, because we work with groups, around rural, kind of social economic groups that are facing rural poverty as well. And it's just, slightly different focus in Wales, I think, really. Yeah, so I think that's all I need to say about that. So we thought it'd be just nice if people just very briefly went round and just said, 2 lines about kind of what they're doing in their area, if they're just here for themselves or if they're part of a group. That would be nice. And so I'll lead that to make sure it goes around speedily. So I'm going to choose Sophie first, if that's all right, because you're kind of next to me.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sophie. I've been a participant at Green Minds, which is led by Brecon and District Mind. for about 3 years. I've just started volunteering to help run the group. Yeah, we've got a lovely space up at Brecon Cathedral and quite a few fruit trees there. So I'm interested in learning more about orchards and forest gardens and things.
That's great. Thank you, Sophie. I'm going to go for Liz next, please. You need to unmute. Liz, you need to unmute. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm Liz. I'm a volunteer in a village outside Newtown called Tregunnon, and we have a plot of land we call the Parsons Field, which is now a community garden. We're in our 3rd year, but the first year was really spent getting ideas, bringing people together, getting planning permission, getting grants and so on. But we're now up and running, and we've got an orchard area in the garden, and always keen to learn more about how to manage that.
Lovely. Thank you. That was excellent. Sarah, are you there? Yep.
Sorry. God, sorry, dog barking. Yes, I'm here. So I've been running Green Minds in Brecon through Brecon and District Minds. So we've got, as Sophie mentioned, we've got a community garden there with a small orchard, and yeah, I'm really interested in learning more about forest gardens in particular, and those sort of very sustainable and maybe eventually lower maintenance ways of growing things with more perennials and things. So yeah, really excited about today.
Cool. Welcome, Sarah, and your dog. Jeremy, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm in Ystrad, right at the southern tip of Powys. I have an area I would like to develop as a community orchard, and I'm trying to get through to Powys, the right people in Powys County Council. I'm having help with that from golly, I can't remember, but it's all help is gladly accepted. And I'm also doing your course in Bristol, which has been quite an eye-opener.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you. Lisa, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm just having to eat my breakfast, so I'm just do that. Sorry, yeah, admit it. Yeah, I'm half an hour south of Newtown, towards half an hour away from Llandrindod, sort of in the middle in the Radnor Hills. And I run a 7-acre market garden, but also we have a group called Grow Wilder, which just helps, it comes on site, and I think of as many things as people can get involved with, and we put things on, and yeah, so it's just involving our community as much as possible, because we're actually on a Radnorshire Wildlife Trust wilding site, and it's really great to involve people. Lots of people volunteer on the wilding side, and so we're involving people on the sort of growing and food side as well. And it's really nice, and quite often we have people come on their own for periods and come and work closely and learn about growing with me as well. So yeah, it's lovely. And I have a small orchard that I've just planted, and I'm not sure how I can involve the community with those yet, but I'm on this course to find out how I can involve people with that, and because I'm going to have got a whole other field that's also going to orchards, so it'd be great to have a lot more community things, certainly community pressings, etc. So yeah, so that's why I'm here.
Lovely. Thank you, Lisa. That's great. Thank you. Eva, are you there?
Hi. Hi. So yeah, I'm Eva, and I'm based at RHS Garden Wesley. So I'm part of the edibles team here, and my main focus at work is management of the orchard. And right now we are collectively working on remodeling into sort of wildlife paradise. Sort of we want to manage it in a more ecologically sound way. And one of the things we would like to incorporate is some things from forest garden, either an actual area of forest garden or just sort of elements in the main orchard. So yeah, looking forward to see your presentation.
Oh, that's great. Welcome from Wisley. That's really interesting. Have you come across any of our team before?
I actually, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some tours, and I think I wrote a little piece, I think, for your blog, which should come out soon. So
Oh, nice. Oh, that's great. Oh, good. And I think it's worth me mentioning, as I was talking to Jane earlier, that there's a we have an online forest garden. If you want to develop your skills with forest gardening more, we have a whole kind of a 6 to 8 month, I think it's 6 months, forest gardening online course that we run. And there's just one day where we invite people to come out and do a tour in their area, but apart from that, it's all done online. Watching videos, doing personal study, and then having homework marked. It's a level 2 course. So if people are interested in that, they can maybe go to our website. I'll try and put the link. It's called the Award in Forest Gardening, and we can put the link on in the chat for you. So in case anyone's interested, just mention that. Thank you. And then Erin hasn't been yet. So Erin, would you like to say something? Oh, okay. Hi. Erin's hiding from her toddler in her bedroom, and she can't talk because the toddler will hear her. You could always put a couple of things in your chat if you want to. Well, no, I'm not currently part of the group. I'm researching and planning an orchard on some land made available near her near Machynlleth. Yesterday she went to a community pressing day. Oh, lovely. So yeah, so involved in local orchards. That's great. Thank you, Erin. Okay, so now over to Kate, who's going to take us on a journey through her PowerPoint, hopefully.
Okay, thanks. Right, let me just share my screen. Go. There we go. Can everybody see that? Yes. I'm just going to minimize. There we go.
Can I just say to everybody, the PowerPoint will be available afterwards, and we'll also share the recording of the of this session. So feel free to sit back and listen. You won't need to take notes on everything because we'll share this. So. Okay, thanks, Kate.
Great. Okay, so forest gardening. Yes, it's an alternative way of growing produce. It takes a while to set up, but the idea is that once it's set up, it's quite low maintenance, and it sort of everything sort of works together. So it's easy to keep going and such. So let's start. So forest gardening is a way of growing food inspired by nature, learning from forest and woodland ecosystems. They are inherently diverse, productive spaces that can thrive with no inputs from us. This has been a traditional form of food growing in tropical climates. And people have been growing food in forests for many, many years, and where they're producing food and medicines for the people that's surrounding them. In the UK, there is a history of foraging from woodlands, harvesting different edible and medicinal plants. Woodlands were and still are a source of folklore and cultural significance, and a source of plants that we can utilise and eat in our environment. But Due to industrialisation, woodland cover was down to 5% of the UK at the turn of the 19th century. It's increased to around 13%. However, woodland wildlife is still diminishing. There's been a resurgence of incorporating trees in agricultural practices. This is called agroforestry. Martin Crawford has several mature examples of forest garden agroforestry systems. He is the director of Agroforestry Research Trust, which is a charity that focuses on educating people about forest gardens and conducting research and informing people about the benefits of these systems. So, what is forest gardening? So forest gardening is a way we can grow food and other yields in a multi-layered system. It's combining perennial plants such as trees and shrubs, and in doing that, we're designing a system that grows vertically as well as horizontally, growing space in different layers. And this essentially mimics a woodland edge. So it's getting your maximum amount of crops in the smallest amount of space by using every bit of space available. So here you have an example, well, of the top 3 forest garden layers. So you have the canopy layer, which is the top canopy layer, and you have the tall trees. You might have small-leaved lime, or you might have Italian alder, the very, very tall trees in that layer. Sometimes if you haven't got room in a forest garden, you might not have that layer, and you would just sort of concentrate then on the lower tree layer, where you have your fruit trees, such as apples and pears. And then below that, you have the shrub layer, where you have berry bushes like currants, raspberries, black currants, and bushes about that height, you know, giving you your produce. The lower layers then is the herbaceous layer, and you will have herbaceous perennials growing each year, but they tend to die back over the winter. So that could include the herbs such as mint, marjoram, thyme, etc. And these plants are grown quite close together, and you the idea is that you don't dig unless you absolutely have to. For your root stuff, produce, you might have to dig, but so you're going to need ground cover between these plants in order to stop any sort of weed invasion. So ground cover plants might include wild strawberry or a ajuga, sort of, that are acting as a weed suppressant plant layer. And then you have your rhizosphere layer, which is where you have your roots and sort of taking into account what's growing underground. So thinking they're edible roots. The examples here as parsnip, beetroot and carrots, which are annuals, but there's also tubers and such as yacon and oca and mashua, where which are more of a sort of perennial type of root vegetable. And then maximizing all that space, you can have your climbers growing up the trees or in any sort of available space, which could be beans or grapes and sort of plants that will grow and give you produce growing up. So we've got the example here of all these layers in the same sort of sort of environment. So you've got the upper canopy, which is 1, and then you've got the lower canopy, where you've got your fruit trees. You've got your shrub layer as 3, and then your herbaceous layer, where you could have your herbs or something there, which is labelled as 4. And then you have your ground cover and the rhizomes, which are 6, and then your climbers. So you have to make some choices about what you want to grow and what will grow well in your site. So with the sort of 3 layers here, you've got your canopy of fruit and nut trees, then you have your shrubs, and then you have your herbaceous layer. So with your canopy, you would be choosing between fruit and nut trees and alder and things like that. Shrubs, again, sort of the currants, the herbaceous plants, whether, you know, sort of mint or anything like that. In choosing that, you need to consider a few things, and that might be the outputs. Do you want, what are the things that you want from your growing space? So we're looking at, do you want fruits, nuts and seeds, or salad leaves and herbs? Do you want vegetables? Do you want spices? What building materials you want? Some forest gardens might have hazel growing in them, where you could coppice the hazel and use that. Weaving materials, again, hazel could be used for doing fencing, and you could grow willow. And then medicine plants such as tansy, and then possibly I've seen some forest gardens with dye plants. So all these plants ideally will fulfill more than one function. So they might create shelter and produce fruit at the same time, or be a mineral accumulator and good for wildlife. Ideally, you want every function provided by more than one plant, so that, for example, you've got more than one species providing nitrogen fixing or ground cover. So wind protection is a really good thing to put in when you're starting planting, so that you've got your shelter belt established to protect those new young plants that you've planted. So for the wind protection, you could have, if you've got the room, you could have the taller canopy trees, or a hedge. Some of those trees could in turn then be nitrogen fixing as well. So for nitrogen fixing plants, we're talking about the alder and the sea buckthorn and the eleagnus and such, which can also form the nitrogen fixing. Nitrogen fixing is plants that will take nitrogen from the air, and then they've got this very, very clever process where they then manage to enrich the soil where the other plants are growing, and fix nitrogen into the soil, which benefits growth. Mineral accumulators generally are plants where you've got a deep, deep taproot. One of the favourite really for the mineral accumulators will be comfrey, which again sort of enriches the soil. It's got a deep root and brings up all those minerals that you want available to your plants. Your trees will be supports for the climbers that you're hoping to grow. And then your ground cover plants, I mentioned strawberries and ajuga, but clover is another ground cover plant, which is really good. And then you're also fulfilling the other function of clover will be a nitrogen fixer. In order for this space to work, you want to encourage biodiversity as well. The idea of the forest garden is all these different sort of purposes to sort of help all the other plants growing in this space. So you want a nice range of plants. And then you also want it all to look really attractive. So you have different seasons, and what outputs do you want during those seasons? So for your winter crops, you would be looking at alliums or spinach beets, perennial brassicas, or a leafy crop such as Siberian purslane. Spring, you could be looking at ramsons, which is wild garlic, garlic mustard, horseradish or sea kale. Summer, you've got quite a good choice really of what your crop is going to produce there. So you could have strawberries, cherries, plums, black currants. And then in the autumn, plums, yew or bladdernuts, service tree or grapevines. And then fruit trees. So as well as choosing what species of plant to grow with your fruit trees, for example, apple or pineapple guava, you may need to choose what variety. For example, thousands of varieties of apples have been bred. You've got Fiesta, Rosemary Russet, Ashmead's Kernel, Bramley, and there's a few varieties of pineapple guava. Look up on the nursery website and you'll find out when these crop, what varieties are best for certain situations. And your variety also will depend on the size and flavour of the fruit, disease resistance. If you're in a very wet climate such as Wales, you might want to choose varieties which are resistant to the fungal diseases such as canker and scab, for example, and taking into account the suitability for your soil. Some fruit trees will need to be cross-pollinated in order to produce fruit. In the case of apples, for example, you will need to find another variety that flowers at the same time in order to have a crop of apples. Some fruit trees will say that they are self-fertile, but what you do need to do is, even if fruit trees say they're self-fertile, if you want to maximize your crop, it's usually better to get a tree that's of the same pollinating time in order to maximize your crop. Also, is your plant dioecious, such as sea buckthorn? If so, you'll need females to produce the fruit and then the males to pollinate them. Most fruit and nut trees will have been grafted onto a particular rootstock, and you'll need to see what rootstocks you want. And this rootstock will decide the size of the tree that you're going to grow. So when it comes to your design process and fitting it all in with an accurate amount of space between them, you need to sort of be sure of this. You also need to say when you produce planting your fruit trees, the distance between the fruit trees in an orchard, we usually sort of say, for example, for an MM106, that you plant about 4.5 meters apart, but you're wanting to grow crops around these trees. So you need to plant them a little bit further apart so that you've got more light getting into those crops that you're growing around the trees. You need to consider fertility. how are you going to provide the nutrients for your plants? Comfrey is a name that usually sort of is one of the best ones for doing this. And we've got a lovely picture of comfrey here. Comfrey can get a little bit out of hand sometimes. So we normally recommend that Bocking 14 comfrey is planted. It doesn't seed, it's a sterile variety. It's quite easy to propagate from cuttings or from root cuttings, but you can have more of a sort of decision about where it's going to grow than whether it's going to seed everywhere. Bark chip can also help with fertility. As it rots down, it provides food in the soil for other plants around it. It acts as a weed suppressant as well. And then we discussed nitrogen fixers before. So again, you can sort of think of your clovers, your alder, your sea buckthorns, and your Elaeagnus shrubs in order to do this. So you need to look at what grows well, how much light and shade you have. So in the canopy, you need to sort of quince, if you were putting in, would need full sun, but a medlar tree, which is pictured, is more shade tolerant. Currants are really good because they can tolerate a partial shade. Consider the herbaceous perennials. So asparagus, you would need in full sun, and the cardoon and Mediterranean herbs. Whereas your plants with broad green leaves, such as rhubarb and spinach, will be more shade tolerant. Groundnut is a vine that tolerates full shade. And when you're considering about these light and shade areas, you have to take your aspect of the forest garden, utilize the edges of the forest garden. So the south-facing edge will be the one where you grow the plants that need the full sun, whereas the more shadier plants can be maybe more in the middle and wouldn't be requiring so much sun. So you need to look at your soil texture. Is it clay-like and sandy? And sort of choose your plants accordingly as to ones that will tolerate that. Asparagus can cope with and quite likes sandy soil, whereas it wouldn't do well in a clay soil. Is your soil acidic or alkaline? Acidic soil might be the one where you would grow blueberries or cranberries or strawberry trees, whereas Siberian pea trees and Cornus mas or Cornelian cherry might be the ones where you grow the alkaline in alkaline soil. And then you have your easygoing plants, such as the sorbus species, such as rowans and white beams and service trees, and hawthorn, where will thrive in both types of soil. How fertile is your soil? Do you need to add sort of the fertility plants that we discussed earlier? And you might want to plant things with deep roots to remedy compacted soil. Comfrey is a really good one again for that. So there's other conditions to think about. The wind. So you've got your evergreen plants where Elaeagnus or sea buckthorn or gorse will help provide that year-round shelter belt to protect your plants from the wind, especially if you're in a very, very windy spot. Got a picture of sea buckthorn on the PowerPoint now. Whether you get a lot of frost. So if that was the case, you might plant varieties that flower later in the year. Medlar is a late flower for a tree, as is hawthorn, hazel, and roses. And you might also be dealing with dry soil, and you get lots of drought. So figs and sweet chestnuts and Mediterranean plants, such as white or grey leaves, such as sedums or saltbush or lavender, will cope really well with that sort of condition. How easy are the plants that you have chosen to grow? How fast do they grow? And how well do they generally crop? These are all things that you need to consider in your design. So the suggestion is here is if you sort of create a table, this is a very simplified table where you can list the plants that you are considering and decide whether they fit the bill in your area that you're planting, and also where they're going to go in the general design of the forest garden, depending on their requirements and how tall they are and which, what sort of soil they want. And creating a table like this will help you sort of decide then when it comes to your design. So this is a design for a forest garden, and it's a really good idea to put this all down on a piece of paper with various sort of keys and colours and things like that. So you've got your general planting plan before you start. And you start with putting the trees in, and then you sort of get smaller. And but in order that you've got space for everything, a planting plan like this is a really, really good idea. So we've also got fruit tree guilds. So this is the sort of mini forest garden that you might have going on around your fruit trees in an orchard. So what is a fruit tree guild? So plant guilds are a common design in permaculture gardens and are also influenced by forest garden principles. So that would be where you've got everything working together. So to quote Pippa Chapman on this subject, a guild is a community of plants carefully chosen to complement each other by fulfilling different functions, creating a harmonious ecosystem. So a fruit tree guild, again, is a combination of plants that centres around a fruit tree, with each plant providing one or more of the following functions. So you want your pollinator attractors, flowering plants that will attract the bees in order to pollinate your fruit trees. You want the repellents, so plants that would repel aphids or slugs and such, suppressors and ground cover, mulchers, mineral accumulators, and nitrogen fixers. So let's talk more about these. So your pollinator attractors, flowering plants that attract a wide range of pollinators, bees, moths, butterflies, and beetles. And then try to think of plants that bloom throughout the year. So you've got a succession of these pollinating attractors in order to pollinate your trees, whether they're early fruiting or late, early flowering or late flowering. Repellents are plants that repel common pests and are mainly due to their strong fragrance. Garlic or alliums might be a good example of that, which will repel aphids and slugs. Something that we need to remind ourselves with pollinating attractors is you want native bees as well. So a lot of the time we sort of tend to focus on honeybees, but there's a lot of native bees that are all in trouble. It's not just the honeybees. So the pollinating attractors will help with all of those. And then maybe in either a forest garden space or a fruit tree orchard where you're having your guilds, some bare soil to attract ground nesting bees, and just some of the other types of native bees, which are all struggling so much. Ground cover. These are plants that will naturally spread across the surface of the soil, filling in the bare patches of ground over time, suppressing weeds, and helps keep the soil cool. Now, your mulches are plants that typically have large leaves and will die back annually. Their leaves mulch the ground. They can also be chopped and dropped. Comfrey is a common mulcher, as is rhubarb. So your mineral accumulators could involve plants like chicory as well as comfrey. They can access other nutrients from the soil. And when the plant dies down, essentially they then feed the soil, making these inaccessible nutrients available to other plants. Chop and drop was mentioned with comfrey just now. So you can chop the leaves off with the comfrey and spread it around your plants, which then provides a weed suppressing mulch. But as those leaves rot down, they feed the soil and enrich it, allowing other plants to grow. So your nitrogen affixers as well. So we've got a picture of the clover there, and these are plants that fix nitrogen gas from the air into the soil. Nitrogen's a vital nutrient for plants and can add nitrogen fixing plants. That can mean that there's an ample supply for these plants to grow. You've got a very, very sort of big number of plants all growing in a small space, which is why you really have to sort of think of the fertility of the soil, because there's an awful lot of nutrients being taken out by these closely planted plants in the soil. So you have to put that in as well. And then biodiversity. So you're adding lots of different plants to create niche habitats, attract pollinators and other invertebrates, which can then attract birds. So essentially what you've got going on is a thriving ecosystem. So you're getting away from a monoculture idea where you've got all the same plants or similar, and by creating a polyculture, you're creating a far more resilient space, which will be more resistant to climate change and just give a wider yield of produce. So the benefits of guilds, where you have increased yields. So you'll have food and then fuel, fibre, fodder, fertilizer, pharmaceutical plants, and above all, fun. So you've got, when it comes to attracting a community group, you've got a lot more plants which will give a yield not just during the fruit times of your orchard. You've got, they'll be producing produce around the trees at different times of the year. So you've just got more of an output spread more over the period time of the year. So having a guild means a wide variety of plants with built-in resistance, resisting climate change, unpredictable weather, and so we need to be more adaptable, especially with how we grow food. Having more plant crops also means there's more chance of success if one crop fails, and then others might well survive. Forest gardens and fruit tree guilds can be beautiful spaces for us to enjoy. We can engage with our senses and connect with nature in this abundant space. So there are lots of different design frameworks to choose from, and having a design framework for your guild can help make the process seem a little bit more manageable and organised. So we got in the picture here an example of a fruit tree guild system that was developed in Manchester, where I'm going to be going a little bit more into sort of the design process that went into that. Before you do your design, you need to look at what you've got and do a site survey. So you have to look at the aspect of your site. Where are the sunnier areas, which is facing south and west, and where are the more shady areas? Your soil type. Again, we were talking about this with forest gardens, whether you're looking at compacted soil or acidic or neutral or alkaline soil. Where is the prevailing wind coming from? What wildlife is going to be visiting the site? You try and attract wildlife, but there's certain wildlife such as voles and things like that where they might attack the trees. So you need to sort of think, do I need tree guards and such? What buildings have you got nearby? Are they going to shade the trees and sort of cast a shadow? And the people that you have going on visiting the site, what plants do they want to grow? What is going to be consumed and used most? So when you've taken all of these factors into consideration, you can then set up a design framework. So you've observed what the various factors such as soil type and winds and wildlife and everything from your site, and then you can analyze it and work out what is the best sort of navigation you have around these observations, and then set a design up in process so that you're working with your observations and what you need and what will work well. So the next stage after that is implementation, where you will plant those according to your design. And then after that comes the maintenance, where there will be weeding involved, there will be watering and just general care of the area. So the next diagram is the sort of design that you might put. So it's quite small, but in the middle is the apple tree, the sort of the small circular, and the plants that you've got growing around that tree. So we've got a north arrow there, which will tell you which are the sides of that guild, which are going to be the sunniest or the shadiest, according whether they are south or west facing. And then you can put your design onto a piece of paper and decide what needs the most sunlight, where it's going to go. You also need to consider height. So you wouldn't allow your tall plants to shade the lower, smaller plants. And this is an example of where somebody has taken that into account and done a design like that. And you'll notice at the top, you've got the carrots and the daisies and the coriander, which will require sun, and that's the south-facing area. So one of our project managers in Manchester was involved with doing plant fruit tree guilds at a project called GROW. So that stands for Grassroots Oldham's Women's Enterprise. So you can see where they have covered the soil initially around the fruit trees in order to kill back any grass or anything like that. It's sort of looks like a Hessian material that's been put around there. So that will suppress whatever's growing there, kill off the grass because you've prevented the light getting to it. So that would need to be put in to start with. And then in the second picture, you can see where you've got that bare soil around the fruit trees, and an area again has been covered up to produce the beds, and then paths put across it like that. And in the next picture, you can see where that bare soil has been made with a path, with a sort of keyhole effect, with the fruit tree growing in that keyhole, with the area around the fruit tree to be planted. And again, most importantly, you need to be able to get to these plants that are growing around the fruit tree. So you've got the paths, and I think they very cleverly put in blocks or sort of stepping stones as well to help people weed and maintain that area. So the list of trees that were grown, trees and plants that were grown in this area. So you've got the cherry trees in the middle, and then you'll have currants and rhubarb and horseradish, comfrey, clover, chamomile, mint, strawberries, thyme, lupin, and dill and nasturtium. So you've got different heights of plants there, all giving out different produce at different times of the year, but contributing to the overall health of the soil and the growing space. And you can see in the picture what it looked like when it was first planted. And then for the last picture, we've got only after 3 months, but you've got these plants sort of having come on and growing bigger and sort of taking up the space and such. So those will continue to grow, and you're not good, sort of in the future, you're not going to have that amount of bare soil growing around those trees. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. There you go. And we got any questions about that?
Nothing in the chat, so if people want to maybe put their hand up, you can take questions. Lisa, what would you like to ask?
I'd sort of just like to say, you're sort of noticing that list of things you said could go around the bottom of the tree. It was lovely because like the mints and the thymes would be dealing with pests, and then other things would be attracting pollinators. So as well as having other sort of products you can get from it, they all seem to be all serving different purposes as well, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that orchard has, I can't remember how many trees, but it's more than you can obviously see in the photo, and they're all spaced out already. They're already there as an orchard. And so I think the idea with that guild was that they were starting it off around those first 2 trees, and then they were going to perhaps replicate, you know, the possibility was that they could then replicate that through the orchard then and carry it on. So that's something that you can do as well, especially if, you know, one of the key factors is kind of the capacity of your group, how much time people have. And at the weekend, I went to see a forest garden in Bristol called Bridge Farm, and they've got quite a low capacity for the amount of volunteers they've got, and they meet monthly, and they are really struggling with quite a big area of forest garden and how to keep the weeds down and how to sort of kind of keep on top of everything in the early days. So, you know, doing the guilds is a really nice thing because you can just start with a small area. You could keep, you know, mowing once a year the rest of your grass and just start on a few trees at a time and get that going, get that developing, and get the ground covers in, managing the ground. And then you can kind of, then maybe the next winter do, you know, the next area. So you're not trying to do too big an area in one go, because if people do, you know, they get a team in, they do a lot of clearing work, getting rid of perennial weeds and things, and then they just can't keep on top of all of it. So then you end up doing that work again a couple of years later when you're ready to plant. So it's good to kind of keep the areas small that you're starting with, unless you've got, you know, quite a big group to work with all the time. You know, you just want to make it manageable, because in the early days, as Kate kind of said, when, you know, you're in the early days with your forest garden, there is quite a lot of weeding and management and watering to do while the plants are still young. But after a few years, as those ground covers spread out and all the plants develop and everything starts to grow a bit more, it gets easier. And obviously they're not as young, they're perennials, they've settled in and they're easier to manage. There's less maintenance as you go along, and it should get low maintenance, but it's not that low maintenance in the beginning. I think people underestimate how much work you need to do initially, all the planting and then the setting up and everything. So it's just worth, you know, not taking on too big an area to start with. So I just wanted to say that, really. And also that when you start out, your trees might be quite small, their canopy area might be quite small. You've given them, you know, 5 to 7 meters, say, in space, but they're not taking up that space yet because they're young. So you've got quite a lot of light coming in to your space initially, possibly, that you can use. So you can grow stuff in there, even like self-seeders and annuals and things as well, to maximize all the space. But later on, when your trees have matured, the design that you originally did will be kind of like that final, maybe that final phase when you've got a mature canopy and you've just got things in the light to the edges of that, and then underneath will be more shady things. But obviously initially that light pattern is different. So it's worth thinking about kind of how you phase your design of your forest garden so that you can maximize the use of all that light to begin with. But that might, over time, some of them will naturally move, some of them will die out and move, you know, around to fit how the light is changing as the trees and bigger shrubs kind of spread. Cool. Questions? Lisa again.
I just thought that what you said about doing a little bit and then doing it the next year, the thing is that the next year you'll be able to take cuttings from the tree, from the bushes, and you'll be able to get the seeds from the lupins, and so actually you could do it at very low cost if you do it that way. It just struck me when you said that was a really good idea.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, you can get into the propagation. Maybe it's difficult in the first year when things are quite small, but after that, yeah, you definitely start getting, and you can definitely collect seed, yeah, and you can just start getting propagation going, and yeah, you can definitely save money and share things as well with other people. Anybody else have a question? Did I miss somebody the first time before I went into my spiel?
Hi. I've got a question about pruning and maintenance of the trees. Obviously, if you have those guilds below the tree, then I suppose you have less opportunity for sort of accessing the tree, I guess, if it matures.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I guess in the early stages, you've got quite a diversity of plants under there. That's why you've got the stepping stones and things to help you get access. And then over time, probably you'll find that, you know, the tree canopy will be greater and the plants will be a little further away. So you probably end up with, you know, certain ground covers and plants that will do really well. And sometimes some of them don't do as well. So you'll end up with, you know, a good, hopefully, bank of certain stuff. And if you tread on the odd plant, it's okay, you know, you can kind of go in there and do your management. But it is, yeah, you do have to think about that. One of the projects I'm involved in is an agroforestry project where we have annual vegetable rows on a rotation for the box scheme, and then we've got some fruit trees in rows through that field. So we've had to think about, for example, access to harvesting, because we don't want people coming in the middle of the sort of prime vegetable harvesting season and walking over the crops while they're trying to harvest apples. So we've done, you know, sort of later fruiting varieties where we need to. So we've had to sort of think about that kind of thing as well. People coming in to sort of harvest and as well as maintenance. That's a good point. Thank you for that question. Any other thoughts from people?
Yeah, it struck me that some of the designs and the lists of plants and things are really interesting, and I think for community gardens it might be worth, if you do a forest garden, having those available for people to see what's been planted, to be written down either by labelling the plants or by having your design available somewhere, particularly for those that maybe haven't been involved from the beginning. So I think that could be really interesting for people to learn about what's happening in the garden.
Yeah, so like interpretation of what's there. Yeah, so that's a really good point as well, is this thing about, you know, you're using perennials and many of them may not be so common for people. There may be things people haven't heard of before and don't know how to use. So one is the kind of labeling of them, and two is like the sharing information about them and how you can use them, and having maybe like cooking days and ways of sharing that sort of knowledge so people get to taste and try unusual things. And then, because otherwise you walk into that garden that's been planted like, say, 7 years ago, and it can be quite difficult walking to somebody else's garden or, you know, orchard, isn't it? And you're like, well, I don't really know what they did here, and I just see some plants, but I don't know what they are. So that labeling is really important. One of the things I've done in a garden I'm supporting is we have slates. Each bed has a slate, quite a big slate, and we write on it in white what's in that bed. So even if individual labels and things come off, you can still see clearly what is in each bed. And that, you know, and that can be easily changed if we need to later on. So it's quite a flexible way of labeling the beds. And then bigger shrubs and plants all have a metal tag with their labels and their rootstocks and things on. And I wanted to show you this book. I don't know if you can see that, is it backwards? But it's Martin Crawford's Forest Garden Manual, quite a thick tome. Not that cheap, but it's got, you know, massive information about different plants in there, all suitable for forest gardens. There's lots of stuff on his website as well, the Agroforestry Research Trust website. But if you're serious about setting up a forest garden, you want to do more than just a little guild, then it's really worth getting that book. It's actually called Creating a Forest Garden. I'll put it in the chat. That's a really great Bible to have, because it tells you about each plant, what its needs are, what you can use it for. I would say that in forest gardening world, people can be quite gung-ho. If they've got bigger spaces, like Martin has quite a big space that he uses, they're a bit gung-ho about plants that we might consider quite invasive or spreading. So you do have to watch if things are, you know, quite a spreading. I mean, some of his things are actually on the sort of list of things you're not allowed to plant, you know, because they're so spreading. So you've got to really consider that, haven't you? And also taste-wise, some things that people with a developed taste for these things might go, oh, that's quite nice, you know, put that in as edible. But when you actually taste it, you think, actually, I don't know whether anybody really would want to eat this.
Yeah. Yeah, because Martin advocates three-cornered leek, doesn't he, and Hotunia, which I wouldn't put anywhere near. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Jane. That was a good point about the interpretation of things. Yeah, and making sure people can understand what's there and see the design.
I hope Liz doesn't mind me mentioning, but I went to visit Parsons Field the other day, and they've got some lovely boards showing the design of their garden, and it could be that there could be a smaller one in a different area for different parts of the garden. And then the other thing that Liz showed me is a folder of information of the things that they've done in that group. And it could be that information could go in a folder that's in the shed or somewhere, or on a poster in the shed or something like that, and labels with plants in the ground as well. So I hope you don't mind, Liz, me sharing that, but it was lovely to see.
Yeah, information boards are really good, you know, but they're just a bit expensive, aren't they? But yes, sometimes funding allows for that. But, yeah.
We've also got an A-frame board, like freestanding, that has a magnetic kind of clear thing that you take off, and you can put posters and stuff in there and then put it back on again. So I've got like all for my forest garden that I'm supporting, we've got like all the designs and stuff in there, but they do still need to be laminated, because although it's got this clear cover that's meant to keep the water out, it kind of gets a bit of condensation in there and things can run. So you've got to watch what you put in there, but you can have quite a lot of information in there and have it out I put it out in the summer, and I tend to put it away in the winter because of this condensation issue. But yeah, it has all the designs and the plant list and everything on there, which is good for people to see. Liz, what would you like to say?
Well, just to add to that, our boards were made by a sign maker, and he installed them, and we got a grant to do that. And there are loads of grants about. I think they cost about £300, so they're not cheap, but I think well worth doing. You see people standing looking for them. You can indicate who has, you know, which organisations have supported you. Yeah,
you're breaking up a little bit, but I think we did hear you. Yeah, so yeah, you can get a grant, can't you? Yeah, and it is worth doing, because that what I said earlier, really, that thing of, if you come into the garden, no one's there, and all you just see is a sea of plants, and you've no idea what they are, you don't really get the benefit of what's going on there. And you really need either a person with you or something you can look at that will help you to interpret what is happening in the garden, and then you can really get something from it. Yeah.
Just to add to that, if any of your groups are interested in signage or in infrastructure around forest gardening, talk to us, because Tuvy Powys may be able to offer you some funding for some of those things. We're having discussion with some groups about signage that's Welsh as well. So it might be that you've got English, but you've got Welsh on there too. So yeah, please do get in touch. Even if you haven't got design plans or anything yet, just let us know, and maybe we can support you in those steps to buying things once you've got your design, like signage. Just to say though that Tuvy Powys funding is actually coming, the project is actually coming to an end in its form in December. So do get in touch soon, and then we'll see how we can support you before the end of that project. Social Farms and Gardens, the wider organisation, the wider charity continues, so there will hopefully be support in different form beyond December.
Thank you, Jane. The other issue I found with like the design is when you do your design and then you plant, and then people give you, it seems to constantly change. It's very hard to pin it down. I think with an orchard, with the trees, you choose your trees and you put them in, and there they are. And maybe the odd one dies, but really they kind of stay fairly static. But with the forest garden, it's such a complex design, and some things don't work very well, and other things take over, and then people add things in. And so it's really hard to choose a moment when you think, well, this is it, this is the final design, because it keeps evolving. So that's one of the reasons I think that I've got, these bed labels that we can change, because some of the things aren't there. We grew quite a lot of perennial alliums, and they didn't really like our environment, so they didn't do very well. So that the beds changed completely into other things now. Yeah, it's quite an evolving thing. And that thing of also, because you've got all that light and space initially, and then later on you haven't, that's another reason why it changes. So it's good to pin yourself down to a design to start with, and it's good to work with that. But it may be that you also have quite a flexible approach to how things are going to evolve as well. More thoughts and questions, please? Erin.
Do you have any suggestions of sort of quite established ones that we could visit maybe in the spring? Or
You want to say, Kate, the ones that you know, or?
Well, Cultivate is quite established, isn't it? Yes. Not in this area. I'm struggling a bit to find any. Yes.
Yeah, there are some in Wales. There was one near
Didn't Primrose Farm have one in
yes,
Hay on
yeah,
Wye?
yes, yeah. There's one in Primrose Farms and near Hay on Wye.
But
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I haven't visited a Primrose Farm for ages. But
my
they
dad
have
used to
one.
run it, so I can.
right, yes, that's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
so that's
Yeah.
one.
Yes.
Obviously, you already know that one. There is one over the West Mid Wales. But I'm not sure. The guys moved on, so I'm not sure like the access to that one. And of course, there used to be the one by Robert Hart, who was the founder of forest gardening in this country. He was on the Shropshire border.
Okay.
Forest garden, but unfortunately it's now owned by private people, so you can't go and visit it anymore, which is such a shame. So that was not available. However, you can come and visit the one that I'm supporting in South Wales. So that's Caetan Gower. You'd need to arrange it through me, but yeah, that's it's only a few years old. It's not very mature, but it's, you know, a good example of agroforestry and forest garden. And then if you go into England, there's quite a lot of examples. So you can go and visit. It is worth visiting Martin Crawford. He's in Devon.
Well, there's Edible Landscapes in London.
Yeah, so Martin Crawford is at Dartmouth, and he's got two sites. One is his one with really big tree canopy, like very woodlandy, and not like most of us probably would have in our smaller spaces. But he's also got a more newer nursery site with a lot of interesting stuff there, and you can really get to see all the plants and things. So that's very interesting. And then, yeah, as Kate mentioned, there are some in London as well. You can look on, there is a website, I think it's called Forest, like it's like the sort of like you know, the National Garden Scheme, but it's the National Forest Garden Scheme or something like that it's called. We can look that up for you. So that has a list of them.
And then
well.
there's Ian Tolhurst, who is
That's not a forest garden though.
No, but it's an example of agroforestry.
Yeah, yeah. So he's an example
yes.
of growing veg with native trees for biodiversity. He doesn't grow fruit, but he's interesting if you're interested in like more of a farming scale type of scheme. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I hope that gives you a little bit of, but they are popping up. Yeah, we've got two in Bristol. So Bridge Farm, which is quite young, they are struggling a bit with it, but you know, if you're nearby, it's worth a visit. But you'd need to check with them. They're just all volunteers. There's no worker there, so it's quite hard to get shown round. And then Grow Wilder has a forest garden. So Grow Wilder does have public days where you can go in. That's in Bristol, the Avon Wildlife Trust site, and they've got an established forest garden that we went to the other day that you can look at as well. So yeah, they are around the place.
We need more.
We do need more, yeah.
Yes.
And it's hard to find, because they're often run by volunteers. Sometimes they don't look aesthetically as great as they kind of probably want them to, because it's just they struggle with the management and the maintenance and sort of keeping them looking really good. If you've got something where there's a worker involved and they've got time, like the one in London, the Edible Landscapes, you know, it's more beautiful and more functional looking, and you can really see they got the signage, and you know, just it's much better for a visit.
What's the one in Reading on the roof garden? Global.
Oh yeah.
That is
the Global Cafe in Reading. Yeah, it's on a roof. Yeah, well remembered. That's worth a visit. Again, you've got to go when the cafe's open. If you're going all the way to Reading to look at it, you want to check they're going to be open and that you're allowed up onto the garden and that it's okay to go there, you know, and so on, because you don't want to waste your trip.
Is that the garden that Steve Jones planted up years ago in Reading? Up there? I'm sure that's the building you put it on.
It's on a roof.
I think it is Steve. Yeah.
He's in
Yeah.
Lanrider. He's a permaculture teacher in Lanrider. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must be him. Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible, and it's, I think, 30 centimeters of soil is the maximum depth, and there's trees and everything going there. So they must really, really sort of keep that soil fertile and productive. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible when you think that it's only 30 centimeters of soil. Yeah.
But take your plant ID book when you go to visit these places, because there will be some things that won't be labelled, and you'll be like, "That's a great looking shrub, but really tasty. What is it?" So make sure you've got your plant ID books with you.
Or apps.
Or apps, of course, as long as they're reliable. Any more? Can we have some more questions, thoughts? Who's thinking of doing this?
Guilds?
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
I think guilds are a no-brainer in a way, really, because everything's supporting everything else. So whether you harvest from it or not, you're going to be supporting your trees, even if you don't take crops from it. But even if you just put comfrey beneath apple trees and mowed it every now and then, because you get more and more build-up of nutrients for your trees to support them, don't you? So
that's really true. It doesn't have to be about the people. It can be just pollinators and nutrients. And you can keep it really simple. You haven't got to do all 7 layers. Okay, so don't be daunted by that. You can just choose, say, 3. So you can have your fruit trees that you've got already. You could have a shrub layer, and you could have a ground cover layer, for example, and just stick with those 3. I would say ground covers are really key. So if you've got an area that you're managing, unless it's grass and you're just trimming or mowing it occasionally, if you've got plants in there, you really want a good layer of ground cover, because if you don't have them, strong plants that are going to outcompete the weeds, then you're going to end up with a lot of weeding, and it just starts to look a bit dismal, and people get a bit disheartened by that. So you want, strong herbaceous plants or strong ground covers that are going to really, like black mint and wild strawberry. There's a creeping ground cover comfrey, Iberican comfrey. So that's a really useful one, which is again feeding the soil, really early flowering, it's great for pollinators, and then also covering the soil as well. So those kind of things, they really add to the low maintenance factor, and it's really key to think about that as well. But yeah, you don't need to have all the layers. So you don't need to have any climbers or root crops or any of the fancier ones, or you can add them in later. You can have your design and then just start with 1 or 2 layers and see how that goes.
I kind of always have this idea also that, like, rather than grass, I'd rather have like a whole bed of dandelions everywhere rather than any grass, because it supports the beets so incredibly, and it's so resilient, and it's just fantastic. It's just lovely.
Come and see my one on the Gow in the spring, and that's what you'll see, loads of dandelions. It's our cheap crop. But yeah, it's true. And and things like dock, anything deep rooted serves the same function of bringing nutrients up. Comfrey is the best one, and it's best at it, and also because it's got those really lovely broad leaves and everything. But even docks, not that you choose to have them, but like they are a really useful mineral accumulator, and they are bringing up nutrients. And then when they drop their big dock leaves, they are mulching the soil for you. So weeds become a bit more interesting in the forest garden environment, as long as they're not things that like couch grass or creeping buttercup, which are kind of dominating but not really serving a helpful purpose for you.
Has anybody got any more questions? Lisa.
Yeah, have you sorry. Have you tried doing like growing on the vining on the 7th sort of layer, putting vines up through trees? Does it reduce, like if you put a kiwi up through a tree, would it reduce the fruiting of the apple tree, or is that an okay thing?
So that's the kind of like original principle is, the idea that you'd have the climbing things and they would be in the trees, but actually it doesn't work. It doesn't often work very well. So you do lose a bit from your trees, and then, you know, if you, so in a way it's quite good to provide some structures for your climbing things to go up. It's in the main, because I think it can be a little bit detrimental, and you don't really get what you want from your climbing plant either if it's in the tree and you can't reach it and things. So yeah. Liz.
There we are. Just to say, I've got a neighbour who's got an oak tree in her garden, and it is totally covered in the summer by a rambling rose. And it's so beautiful, and the tree doesn't seem to suffer at all. And clematis, again, it's not offering food, but it is making it very beautiful. Clematis can work just as well, I think.
That's true, yeah. For flowering plants, I think that's true. I think,
and you've got vigorous trees like alder and lime and such. And if you were starting with those established big trees, they wouldn't suffer if you were to have a climber up them. You know, your more delicate fruit trees would, but you know, some of the larger canopy trees, if you were to use them as supports for the climbers, that would work as well.
It would. You wouldn't be able to reach your climber very well.
No,
so,
no.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's not impossible, and it can work. Some things like mashua, they are climbers and they are a root. So you grow them and you can eat the leaves. They're like nasturtium leaves, and then you can eat the seeds as well. You can pickle them, but then you also can dig up the root. But obviously you need a few plants, because, you know, when you dig up the root, that's the end of that plant. It's not going to carry on growing if you've digged up the root. So you need to kind of like have, you know, keep propagating the roots, as you know, keep them going, so that you've always got a supply. Lisa.
Yeah, have you heard of people growing? I mean, there's lots of perennial veg. I mean, you know, your cardoons, you've got your asparagus, you've got your perennial kales and everything. Have you heard of people integrating that heavily with their in a forest garden situation, or a, you know, forest orchard situation?
Absolutely, yeah. The perennial veg is a really, you know, can be a really key part of it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can use them. You can do like small guilds. You know, Alice Fowler, don't know if people are familiar with her. You know, she does a lot of sort of adding in perennials into her sort of flower garden borders and things. You know, perennial brassicas and things, doesn't she? Yeah, so yeah, definitely you can add them into your guilds. You know, you can add in your brassicas and other perennial veg, and, you know, Babington leeks and walking onions and all those sort of things as well.
I like the idea of some rampant asparagus through the orchard. You know, that'd be quite nice.
Asparagus is a little tricky, because it doesn't move and it needs a bit of space, doesn't it? So where you've got your asparagus, you can't have that many other things, because it's going to come up, you know, in June, and then it's going to like take up that space for the whole year. But obviously you only get the crop for like 2 weeks. So you do have to like look at where you're going to put that, so you can access that crop when you need it, and whether you can grow something that won't compete with it.
And the soil it likes as well. It likes it quite sandy. Yeah.
So plant combinations is quite key. You know, working out what, when you go and look at other gardens, it's really interesting to see what combinations they've used, what works well together, what things won't, you know, over dominate each other, or maybe they take up the space seasonally, they take up the space at different times. Like, say you've got wild garlic, you know, that will be there in the spring, but then in the summer that will die down. You know, what can you have later in the year to take up that space? You know, it's worth sort of thinking about those kind of issues as well.
I'd say walking onions as well, with a little bit of caution. I put those in. They're called walking onions because they spread. They have the bulbil at the top of the stem, and then the stem falls over and the bulbils then root. But so hence they walk, but they can walk into areas where you don't necessarily want them. But yes, as long as if you take those bulbils off, then you can sort of keep them a little bit in the place that they should be.
Yeah. You soon find out there's always going to be a couple of things that you think, are we sure we should have planted this?
Yes. Yeah.
And willow's another interesting thing, I think. Willow and bamboo. So somebody like Martin would say, oh yeah, it's great, the bamboos are great, you know, but if you've got a small space and maybe it's a public space, you've got to be really careful about planting bamboo because it really does spread and you can't get rid of it once you've got it. And willow is a bit similar, you know, it's great to have say a little willow area for basket making, or a nice, you know, willow sculpture of some kind. Maybe it's like a dome or something that children can go in, or maybe it's a structure that you're going to have climbing plants on, and it works really well providing someone's maintaining it. But you can't always be sure that in the future somebody will be maintaining that and they can get really big. So we've got to have a bit of caution with things that are going to be, you know, you have to think, what would this garden look like in 7 years' time if there's nobody here to manage it for a bit? You know, if the volunteer levels go a bit low, you know, make sure that you can work with what you think is likely to happen in the future, and be a bit careful with the spreading things and the big things.
The thugs.
Yeah, and people often say, well, I've put in a hazel, I'm going to keep it coppiced, you know, so it won't be very big, I'll keep it coppiced. But that's fine if you do manage to, but obviously you won't get nuts if you keep coppicing it as well, that's the other thing. But it's like fruit trees, you know, it's no good planting an M25 big rootstock and thinking, well, I'll just try and keep it small, because you're just fighting with nature. You know, if it's meant to be a big tree, it should really be a big tree, otherwise you're creating a lot of work for yourself and it won't do as well. So if you've got, you can coppice hazel or the nut trees, you can coppice horse chestnut, and you can coppice walnut as well. So we, on our project, we are going to do that because Martin Crawford said that would work. So in 7 to 8 years' time, we're going to be coppicing our sweet chestnuts and walnuts and hoping that they still are going to provide us with a crop and do well. But you still got to allow enough space for them, you know, and you can't assume that will always happen. And like a sweet chestnut, if you coppice it, it'll be a medium-sized tree, but if you don't coppice it and it gets to grow on, it'll be really big and cast a lot of shade. That could really change your garden if you've got something like that in there. I was busy writing. I think the pollinator side of it is really exciting. You know, the idea that you can have, if you can try and work at having, you know, something flowering all through the year. Ivy is a nice one for the winter. You know, obviously, like right now, there's a lot of ivy flowers around, and I've seen a lot of ground nesting bees out because they use the pollen from the ivy. So that's, you know, really great time of year to be supporting them before the winter and also in the early spring. And then bulbs are good for the spring, aren't they? So just choosing things all through the year, like Kate was saying, is really great. And concentrating on that layer, having things that are gonna, they might provide food, they might provide nutrients, but they're also going to be flowering as well. And it just looks so beautiful then as well, doesn't it? And it's very inspiring and pleasing when you go into a garden. There's lots of things around flowering at different times of year. That's just really nice for the spirit, I think, as well. Anything else we want to say? Well, we wish you well with your guilds and your forest garden thoughts and designs. We're going to cover survey and design in the next, I'm sure Jen's going to say this, but in the next presentation. So we'll look more at those skills, ways you can do that with community.
Great, thank you, Kate and Witch Hazel. Yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah, lots of interesting things to think about and take away there, and hopefully some of you will be able to try some of those things in your community gardens. After this, in the coming days, I will put an email together with some of the links that have been mentioned and the PowerPoint. And once we manage to get the recording up online, we'll put it on YouTube, and then there'll be a link to that you can share with your groups. So as Witch Hazel mentioned, the next session is on the 28th of October. It's online, and it's about survey and design for new orchards and choosing what to plant and how to plant them. So some of you may have already signed up for that one. If you haven't signed up for it and you want to, the sign up form is on our web page for Tuvey Powys, which I've just put in the chat. And if you filled in that sign up form before and you said you couldn't come, and you can, just let me know, drop me an email, which you should have from my email address already. Just as I've mentioned before, for some of you that are new, Tuvey Powys support, I mentioned that, yeah, if you're interested in funding for signage, we might be able to look at that. There's also an infrastructure grant that we're offering at the moment. It is due to close soon, but do get in touch if you're thinking about anything to do with your community garden that you might want to put in. That could be things like raised beds and small polytunnels, but particularly, you know, we can support you in purchasing trees, guards, stakes for fruit trees and other plants that might be part of forest garden that goes underneath any fruit areas that you've got as well, nuts as well. So do have a think about that in the coming week or two. But as I say, that fund is coming to an end soon, but ask me anyway, and I'll see what I can do if you've got ideas and thoughts about that. The other one that a number of groups on this call are also having is a mentor, an orchard mentor. So we're working with Joey Hughes from Orchard Daughters, who's going in to visit some Powys community gardens to help with looking at your orchards and developing them. He's not specifically around forest gardens, so hopefully this workshop will add some guidance on that for you. But do let us know if you're interested in an orchard mentor. Joey can come in for 2 or 3 sessions to visit your site and help you develop it in that sense. And then the other things that we're offering are, which I've mentioned before, we've got grants for events. So at the moment, particularly, there's an Eat Well grant, and it's around, lots of groups are using it for harvesting events, apple pressing events, particularly in this season at the moment. So that might be of interest. And open days, and there is a People and Planet grant as well for Tuvey Powys, which might be around biodiversity and kind of more climate change related things to do with your garden. So do look at our website. If you can't see anything there, or you've got anything else you want support with, just email me and ask. I have emailed, when I sent you the joining instructions for this session, I added a feedback form. I know it's becoming very familiar to some of you, the same feedback form, but we do welcome your feedback for each session. It really helps us think about the next one and plan for the future. So if you've got a few minutes after this, please find your email and fill in the feedback form and email that back to me. That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, it's great to hear how you found the sessions. And just to remind you that Jane has put quite a few of the things we mentioned, they are all in the chat. The links to, I've just put the book link in, the National Forest Gardening Scheme, Jane's put in there, the link to the Agroforestry Trust website, and a few other things. So it's worth saving the chat if you can. And we'll also, I'm sure that Jane will put those in an email to you as well.
Yeah, I will try and do that. Great. Well, I think we'll bring this session to a close, and I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming. And I hope over the weeks of doing these workshops that you're really building up useful knowledge for your orchards and forest gardens, hopefully. So yeah, and it's good to welcome you. Yeah, Liz?
We are. I was just wondering if one was going to put on an Eat Well event, do you have speakers available or recommended speakers available to sort of run
It depends on the themes you're interested in. If there's a particular thing you're thinking of, we might be able to find some. So yeah, maybe we can have a separate conversation about that.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions before we say goodbye?
And just to say to Eva, if because you're from the RHS and you're not in Powys, if there's anything I'm going to put my email in the chat for you, because if there's anything that you wanted to come back to us about or wanted to talk to us about our work, then please do. So I'm just going to put that in the chat now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And I've just put my email address there as well. Sorry to
Great.
I hope it doesn't confuse anyone, but mine's there as well. Actually, one more thing, just to mention that I mentioned before, if you're accessing new land for orchards, we've got Community Land Advisory Service that can help you with trying to access new land and lease and licenses. So yeah, if any of those things are useful, do get in touch. And yeah, good luck this season with everybody.
Lovely. Thanks, Jane.
Jeremy,
Thanks, everybody.
Jeremy, do you want to say something?
Yes, CLAS have been helpful for me to try and get better access to the county council.
That's brilliant.
Basically, make a good sales leaflet, and they gave me 3 names to whom to send it.
That's fantastic news. I'm really pleased to hear that, Jeremy. Yeah, we've got a really lovely team. A number of people, Lucy and Sarah, and a number of others that can help. So I can put you in touch with anybody else. And yeah, really good to hear, Jeremy. And I hope that's progressing for you.
Yes.
Look forward to seeing you soon, Jeremy, on the course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully see you all again at some point soon. So take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Very much. Bye.